February 27th, 1933. At 9:27 p.m., a massive fire erupts inside the Reichstag, Germany's House of Parliament. Marinus van der Lubbe, a 24-year-old half-blind Dutch communist, is found half-naked behind the building and arrested on sight. After an interrogation and trial, Marinus is beheaded 3 days before his 25th birthday. Historians argue that Gestapo police entered the Reichstag through an underground tunnel and soaked the building with chemicals and gasoline, with Marinus van der Lubbe arriving later to start the fire with his shirt. Later that evening, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring meet in front of the flaming debris to round up a list of communists and execute them that same night. The next day, Hitler passed the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended most civil liberties and banned publications considered unfriendly to the Nazi cause. Hitler then takes Nazi control of the German parliament, passes the Enabling Acts, and begins his invasion of neighboring countries, starting with Poland.
Sneak attack. We needed one thing. That vital need was the information available in Washington from the intercepted dispatches, which told when and where Japan would probably strike. I did not get this information.
A number of government investigations concluded that there was considerable foreknowledge of the Japanese plans. Roosevelt declares December 7th an unprovoked and dastardly attack, an act of war between the United States and Japanese Empire, and asks for carte blanche to enter World War II. Beginning that month, the United States military begins recruiting the top rocket scientists from Nazi Germany. The project, known as Operation Paperclip, eventually included more than one. The Manhattan Project, a joint effort between the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada to develop strategic nuclear weapons, culminates with a detonation in New Mexico, nicknamed the Trinity Test. The detonation was equal to 19 kilotons of TNT and left a crater of radioactive glass 10 feet deep and 1,000 feet wide. Nagasaki, Japan. 40,000 are killed and almost 30,000 are injured. The bomb destroyed 1 square mile and started fires almost 2 miles out. In the end, the Manhattan Project cost nearly $2 billion and employed more than 130,000 people at 3 different facilities across 3 different states. And natives were literally packed up and moved out. Although tens of thousands of people were directly affected, the Manhattan Project was kept a secret. So secret that Vice President Harry Truman only became aware of it after President Roosevelt's death. General Groves himself claimed, compartmentalization of knowledge was the very heart of security. Each man should know everything he needed to know and do his job, and nothing else. To this day, much of the Manhattan Project remains classified. November 21st, 1945.
And here is the presidential jet, U.S. Air Force number 1, printed on the side, and the crowd begins its cheer, which you can't hear.
Over the now turning on to Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the trademark. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Just a moment, please. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
The President of the United States is dead.
Carte blanche to use military forces in Vietnam. However, documents declassified from the National Security Agency in 2005 confirm that the attack never took place. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution was
search and destroy mission in a free fire zone of South Vietnam, a place called Pinkville near Quang Ngai in the northern part of Vietnam. The Army says that a platoon led by First Lieutenant William L. Calley Jr., a 26-year-old combat veteran, the Army claims that they murdered 109 Vietnamese villagers, mostly women and children. Calley doesn't necessarily dispute that fact.
September 2000. The Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank whose members include Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Jeb Bush, releases their report entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. The report calls for a massive overhaul of the United States military and encourages fighting and winning multiple theater wars. They declare that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. 17 of the project's participants would later take positions in the next White House administration. Eight years have passed since September 11, 2001. Although the World Trade Center is slowly being rebuilt, the family members and survivors are far from rebuilding the lives which were shattered on that fateful day. The 9/11 Commission, the official investigation into what happened, published its findings and closed its doors 3 years prior. Yet questions still remain in the minds of many. What could drive so many people to continue to question such a tragic event? The events of 9/11 were used to shape the Bush administration's entire foreign and domestic policy. If the details of the events are proven to be a lie, then the authenticity of the Bush administration's entire tenure. September 16th, bin Laden officially denies responsibility on Al Jazeera television. Regardless, Bush claims he wants bin Laden dead or alive, and the CIA is dispatched to Afghanistan to bring back his head in a box. On December 13, 2001, the Department of Defense releases a videotape allegedly discovered in a house in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden discusses the attacks, but does not take responsibility. American mainstream media and even President Bush would portray this videotape as absolute proof of his guilt, even though the 9/11 for the first time. Al Jazeera does not say how they received the tape. The final bin Laden video was released in 2006. Does anyone else see a problem here? Osama bin Laden has never been captured or officially convicted for September 11, 2001. Although audio tapes attributed to him are occasionally released, As of this date, he is considered dead by most. As for the hijackers, the 19 hijackers were painted as radical Muslims, sneaking into the United States without any problem and raising zero suspicion as to what they were planning. First, they were not devout Muslims spending their last days preparing for paradise. In the month, claims that the United States only knew of 3 hijackers prior to the attacks: Nawaf al-Hamzi, Salem al-Hamzi, and Khalid al-Midar. For starters,
Al-Kai Collins says he was paid $2,500 a month as an FBI informant in Phoenix. In a stunning disclosure to ABC News, he claims that 3 years before September 11th, he began providing the FBI with information about Hani Hanjar, a young Saudi who later helped fly hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 into the side of the Pentagon.
They knew he lived in Phoenix. They knew his phone number. They knew his address. They knew what he drove. They knew everything there was to know about the guy.
The FBI emphatically denies that Collins provided any information about Hani Hanjar, but they do admit that they paid Collins to monitor the Islamic and Arab communities of Phoenix because of his unusual background. Once in Phoenix in 1996, the FBI asked Collins to focus on a group of young Arab men, many of whom were taking flying lessons. Hani Hanjar was part of the group.
They drank alcohol. They messed around with girls and stuff like that. They all lived in an apartment together, Hani and the others.
Collins said he provided the FBI with basic facts
of Washington on her office wall.
He pulled out a wad of cash about that big around and started throwing money on my desk. He wanted that picture really bad. He asked about the Pentagon and the White House and pointed them out.
He asked about the Pentagon?
Yes, sir, he did. In fact, he picked out where the Pentagon was.
Brian says Ada also asked her about security at the World Trade Center and what she knew of Chicago, Seattle, and Los Angeles.
Hijacker Hamza al-Ghamdi had a flight booked for later on the day of 9/11, and 2 after 9/11, 1 from LA to San Francisco, and 2 within Saudi Arabia. The complexities of the alleged hijackers are far and wide. We can only begin to scratch the surface here. They even managed to find hijacker Satam al-Sukami's passport, perfectly intact, on a sidewalk before the South Tower's collapse. Is it possible that the hijackers were merely patsies in a scheme much larger than themselves or Osama bin Laden?
Be careful where we stay on a loop, because these are being recorded and these tapes will be handed over. Everybody copy that?
ICC copy. I'm glad I'm not flying today. Don't worry, Jim. We'll carjack you on the way home.
Between September 2000 and June 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would send fighter jets to intercept errant...
Not 1, but 4 commercial aircraft into precious U.S. targets. Never.
Steve, I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic.
Terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats like the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the Capitol. One part of the exercise involved a Haitian AIDS victim who makes a deal with the Colombian drug cartel to crash a private jet into Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida in order to secure funding for AIDS patients. They even wrote up a suicide note for him, which was planned before 9/11 but not executed until 2002, involved 2 Delta planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents hijacked the planes and diverted them to secure locations. The FBI claims it has no records regarding this exercise. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself. But before we cover those, on the morning of September 11th, President Bush was in Florida to promote an education policy. At approximately 8:30 a.m., he left his hotel and headed for Booker Elementary School in Sarasota. Before entering the building, he was aware a plane had struck one of the Twin Towers. In fact, Bush claimed more than once that he saw the first strike live on television. This is impossible, unless President Bush saw something the public has not. Video of the first strike was not broadcast until later that evening. Minutes after Flight 175 strikes the South Tower, Chief of Staff Andrew Card leans into President Bush's ear, whispering and walking away. And President Bush continues to listen to My Pet Goat. Despite the fact that both Twin Towers had been hit and another plane was in the air and suspected to be hijacked, he remained at the school for a half hour, addressing the nation at 9:30 a.m. How could the Secret Service allow this? President Bush's itinerary had been public knowledge since September 7th. The only way Booker Elementary could not be considered a target was if the Secret Service knew for a fact that it wasn't. With that being said, September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and NORAD which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. It did so by placing inputs onto the screens of military controllers at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in Rome, New York, known as NEADS. As the attacks unfolded, controllers at NEADS thought that what they were watching was all part of an exercise. Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana also participated in Global Guardian. Instead of returning directly to Washington, D.C., President Bush flew from Booker Elementary to both Barksdale and Offutt Air Force Base before returning to the White House. Another war game, Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets from unknown locations to bases in Canada and Alaska to monitor a fleet of Russian MiGs. 3 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, located just 15 miles from the Pentagon, were flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina, leaving them unable to defend the nation's capital. Langley Air Force Base, which is 130 miles from the Pentagon, would not launch fighter jets until 9:24 a.m., a half hour after the North Tower is struck and 10 minutes before the Pentagon. Although Major Kevin Nisipany at NEADS ordered them to fly towards the capital, they are instead sent out to the Atlantic Ocean. From the CIA, in which a plane crashes into their headquarters. There are a number of other war games that have yet to be fully disclosed. So, let's review. On the morning of 9/11, the United States military is conducting war games in which fighter jets are flown out of the country. Planes...
New York, hold on, you heard that, right? Yep. You.
Listen, Central, be advised from my location now. I see heavy smoke coming from the building of the World Trade Center. At this time, I advise you that you send them
second airplane went in on the other
other side of the World Trade Center, plane number 2.
Information headed towards Washington.
Okay, let me tell you this. We were looking, we're also lost American 77.
Okay, 77. Where was he proposed to head, sir?
Excuse me?
Where was he proposed to head, sir?
Okay, he was going to LA also.
He was also going to LA.
Down
to Flight 77. Special Agent McGuire of the FBI located a CD-ROM that contains copies of 2 recordings made by security cameras, released on March 16, 2006. A video taken from a Citgo gas station, which is open only to Pentagon employees, released on September 15, 2006. And the Doubletree Hotel in Arlington, Virginia, released on December 7, 2006. As of this date, we still have no clear images of what happened at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. The official story goes as such. American Airlines Flight 77 was taken over by 5 hijackers led by Hani Hanjour. Hanjour entered the United States in 1996 to become a professional airline pilot, though he did not complete a single course. On the morning of 9/11, Hani and his 4 accomplices traveled to Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C. They had spent the past weeks at the Valencia Motel in Laurel, Maryland, 6 miles from the National Security Agency. All 5 set off metal detectors and are subjected to additional screening. Yet, all of them proceed to board American Airlines Flight 77, which is described by the Washington Post as unusually light on passengers. Out of 188 seats, 64 would be filled. In fact, all 4 planes involved in 9/11 would be at approximately 30% capacity. The hijackers will board alongside Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, and a number of employees from Boeing, Raytheon, the Department of Defense, Lockheed Martin, American Airlines, the Navy, Army, and other government agencies. The hijackers would have only moments to subdue both pilots, remove them from the cockpit, and retain control of the plane. Flight 77 is allegedly taken over without incident at 8:51. No mayday, no evasive maneuver, no sign of struggle. All commercial pilots are trained to send a 4-digit code, 7500, in the event of a hijacking. We are told that none of the 4 pilots on 9/11 did so. The plane soon after begins turning off course. Flight 77's transponder shuts off, and it disappears completely from radar. Flight 77 allegedly flies completely undetected back to Washington from the Kentucky-Ohio border, reappearing on radar screens at 9:32. Had Hani Hanjour wanted to inflict maximum damage, all he had to do was nose down into the roof of the Pentagon. Instead, he begins a complicated 330-degree turn, dropping 7,000 feet and exposing himself for an extra 3 minutes while executing a maneuver described by experienced pilots as nearly impossible. In essence, an amateur pilot who was unable to control a Cessna in August 2001 executed this nearly impossible maneuver in a 757 with skilled precision a month later. Flight controllers at Dulles International Airport were... The 757 allegedly descends over a Sheraton Hotel, Navy Annex, and Citgo gas station before crossing Washington Boulevard. 5 light poles are struck and knocked out of the ground. 1 reportedly strikes a taxi. Flight 77 manages to hit the only section which was reinforced to withstand a terrorist attack. Including reinforced steel and blast-resistant windows an 1.5 inches thick. The renovation, planning for which had begun in 1991, was only days away from completion. Ironically, had the plane struck anywhere else, the casualties and damage would have been far greater. An area that normally would have housed up to 5,000 occupants yielded only 125 casualties. The section hit was the headquarters of Naval Operations, Naval Intelligence, and Navy Command Center. Army personnel were also killed, along with a number of accountants and budget analysts. The Arlington County After Action Report states that important budget information was in the damaged area. So what was left of Flight 77? Not much. These pictures were taken before the roof of the Pentagon had collapsed. The Pentagon's outer wall had a hole approximately 20 feet in diameter on the first and second floor, and visible damage 90 feet across the first floor. A Boeing 757 is 155 feet long, 44 feet high, has a 124-foot wingspan and weighs almost 100 tons. And it disappeared into this hole without leaving any substantial wreckage on the outside. There is no visible damage from where the wings or vertical stabilizer would have hit the building. The engines of a 757 are 6 tons each, comprised of both steel and titanium. If they slammed into the building at 500 miles per hour, where are the imprints? Where are the engines themselves? The 757 appears to have completely disappeared into the building. There are numerous parts to a 757 that are virtually indestructible. Videos that have been released, none of them clearly depict a Boeing 757. Also, an exit hole inside the Pentagon is not explained by any official report. Despite what might have hit the building, why it was hit is much.
Whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?"
However, the 9/11 Commission concludes that Dick Cheney did not reach the PEOC until 9:58, more than half an hour later. The Secret Service claims that it has no record of when Dick Cheney entered the bunker. What were the orders? If they were to intercept Flight 77, why was it allowed to strike the Pentagon?
Let's go to the trade tower again, because, John, we now have a... What do we have? We don't...
Wow. It looks like a new plume, a new large plume of smoke.
That's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Dan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daler down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it's folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
Generally speaking, for a building to collapse...
One New York plaza, a 50-story office building, burned for over 6 hours between the 32nd and 36th floors. It did not collapse. February 23, 1991, One Meridian Plaza, a 38... May 4th, 1988. First Interstate Bank, a 62-story skyscraper in Los Angeles, California, burns for almost 4 hours, destroying 4 floors and damaging a 5th. It was one of the most destructive fires in United States history. The building did not collapse. Even the Twin Towers survived a number of fires. First, a series of fires in 1975, one of which was described as fighting a blowtorch. Then, another in 1999 on the 104th floor of the North Tower. Yet on September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers burned for 56 and 103 minutes before collapsing completely to the ground. Perfectly symmetrical collapse resulting from asymmetrical damage, with the collapse following the path of greatest resistance. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, eventually concluded in August 2005 that they found no evidence suggesting that the Twin Towers were brought down in a controlled demolition. It's funny they would name it the Report on the Collapse of the Twin Towers, because the report does not explain how the Twin Towers actually collapsed, claiming that it does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after initiation was reached and collapse became inevitable. 10,000 pages, and not a single one to actually explain how the towers came down the way they did. NIST admitted in April 2007 that they are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse.
Apartment. Get out of here, the building is coming down. Well, it sounded like it was coming down on us. That cloud, there was a debris cloud created by when the Tower 2 fell. It created a debris cloud which became part of our life because it just burst in our window at 50 miles an hour. That whole cloud just came bursting in, and many people were wanting to investigate whether the collapses were actually controlled demolitions, as many people thought on the very day. Even the news commentators thought they were controlled demolitions. So there was a lot of controversy about whether they were or not. And friends of mine that knew that I had the dust were also knew a scientist, Stephen Jones, at BYU.
My name is Dr. Stephen Jones. I have a PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University, 1978. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from Brigham Young University, 1973. I graduated magna cum laude. I went after, found several of these, and they all had some gray material adhering to the side of the red material. So layered. Later we found multiple layers, but most of these chips have 2 layers, red, gray. I did take one of these chips then to the electron microscope, the scanning electron microscope, and we looked at it with the electron microscope, and then we used a system where we could determine the elements. What we found in the red material is a combination of aluminum and iron oxide, and these are the components of thermite. Of course, now we looked with an electron narrow, which means, in his terms, it blew up. You know, you say, man, this is it. This stuff blows up. It behaves just like it has the ingredients of nanothermite. He said, well, there should be, in a thermite reaction, you should produce molten iron. So you should see some spheres of iron. Think of spraying water in the air, and you get droplets that are more or less spherical because the surface tension pulls the liquid into a sphere. It's very simple. Same thing with molten iron from the thermitic reaction, whether it's ordinary conventional thermite or this super nanothermite. Either way, you get this molten iron, and you should get these droplets of iron. So we said, we got to look for those. You know, if you don't find those, maybe who knows what it is, but we got to find droplets of molten iron, otherwise we're not sure we had the thermite reaction. The thermite with traces obtained with known thermite, these are published data, and our peak is actually narrower. I mean, this stuff goes off with very rapidly and with more energy also than had been reported by these other researchers working with known nanothermite.
As if explosive residue in the dust was not enough, there are other disturbing aspects of the Twin Towers' collapse. Both the North and South Tower collapsed at nearly free-fall speed, 110 stories, reducing itself to a pile of twisted steel and pulverized concrete and building materials in approximately 10 seconds. The Twin Towers combined contained almost 500,000 tons of concrete. This was turned into particles the size of talcum powder, blanketing lower Manhattan in a fine dust. It also turns out that molten metal exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit was discovered in the rubble of Ground Zero, underneath the Twin Towers and Building 7. Firefighters, emergency workers, police, officials, even Rudy Giuliani testified to these massive temperatures. Even after heavy rain on September 14th and 21st, a constant stream of fire retardants and water described as creating a giant lake. These fires were not put out until December 13th, 2001, making it the longest burning lapse. Do you still think that jet fuel brought down the Twin Towers? In almost all the videos of the collapses, violent ejections appear 20 to 60 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 and here. I know what you're thinking. If explosives or incendiaries were in the building, how would they get in there without anyone noticing? A December 2000 assessment of the World Trade Center recommended immediate renovation work on the steel columns contained within elevator shafts of both Twin Towers. Turner Construction, a company located on the 38th floor of the North Tower, was selected to do the job. Turner's CEO at the time was Tom Leppert, who had personal ties to George W. Bush and Carlos Gutierrez, Secretary of the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce is in charge of NIST, an agency that may sound familiar. Turner Construction also did fireproofing work on the very floors that were struck by Flights 11 and 175. Of course, all documents pertaining to Turner's work on the Twin Towers were destroyed on 9/11. In addition, President Bush's brother, Marvin, was on the board of directors at Securicom from 1993 until fiscal year 2000. Securicom, later known as Stratosec, was an electronic security company backed by Kuwait.
If there are people just trying to cast doubt, as if you can't explain everything, you have nothing. That's, of course, absurd. We have found explosive, unexploded, but explosive material in the dust. Now the next step is to find out who did it. So in other words, we've done the forensic CSI-style science. Now we need the criminal investigation to go along with that, to find out who could have made this stuff, first of all, and then who did make it. And then from there we can find out who ordered it being made and why.
If only we could have examined the steel from the World Trade Center. Unfortunately, the debris was almost immediately shipped overseas, being sold to the lowest bidder. This is destruction and removal of evidence from a crime scene. Family members and engineers were outraged at the decision and demanded that the steel be preserved for investigation. Bill Manning of Fire Engineering magazine publicly labeled the cleanup at Ground Zero a half-baked farce. Yet the operation continued until the site was officially clear on May 30th, 2002. Regardless of how it was done or who was responsible, what happened to the Twin Towers seems obvious enough. They were brought down in a highly engineered, unconventional, controlled demolition. It was a psychological attack on the American people, and it was pulled off with military precision. (10:03 a.m., Shanksville, Pennsylvania. United Airlines Flight 93 allegedly crashes into an abandoned strip mine at 580 miles per hour, 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. Speculation ran rampant that the plane had been shot down. First, the story was that passengers overtook the plane and sacrificed themselves to prevent further casualties.
This plane went down. This is apparently another debris site. which raises a number of questions. Why would debris from the plane, and they identified it specifically as being from this plane, why would debris be located 6 miles away? Could it have blown that far away? Seems highly unlikely. Almost all the debris found at this site is within 100 yards, 200 yards away. So it raises some questions. We don't want to over-speculate, of course.
It seems to me from covering a number of plane crashes on the scene that, if nothing else, you can say this is not typical for a plane crash to be spread across an area this large.
It certainly doesn't make sense because most of the debris has been found in a very compact area, within 100 yards, 200 yards, maybe a little beyond that. And then all of a sudden they're telling us 6 miles away they have another concentration of debris. They say it's very small pieces. Most of these are very small pieces. Most of the pieces here are no bigger than the size of a briefcase, they say, and the pieces 6 miles away maybe even smaller than that.
As for the crash site itself, from the Somerset County coroner to the mayor of Shanksville, almost every eyewitness would remark how little of the plane and its passengers remained at the actual crash site.
We have rescue vehicles that came in earlier in the day and they have turned up. Could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
There is zero historical precedent for a large commercial airplane and its passengers completely disintegrating upon impact, regardless of speed, cause, or crash site. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 began breaking apart in mid-air after suffering extreme decompression and crashed into a forest. All 346 people were killed. 40 bodies were recovered, 6 of them still in their seats. Air India Flight 182 was blown up in mid-air by a bomb over the Atlantic Ocean. Wreckage from the plane and 131 bodies were recovered, with autopsies performed. Japan Airlines Flight 123 suffered mechanical failures 12 minutes into its flight and crashed into a mountain. It remains the single deadliest aircraft incident in history. Wreckage and even 4 survivors out of the 500 passengers were recovered. Those are just 3 examples. And yet, on September 11, 2001, we are told that a 757 crashed into a field and left virtually no identifiable wreckage or passengers. The Department of Environmental Protection also reported in October 2001 that no trace of jet fuel was found in groundwater or soil at the crash site. Flight 93 allegedly crashed with over 5,000 gallons, 37,500 pounds of jet fuel left. How is this possible? In 2006, during the trial of the alleged 20th hijacker Zacarias Moussaoui, the FBI provided a batch of evidence that allegedly survived a catastrophic crash in near-perfect condition. Among the exhibits were a red bandana, a Kingdom of Saudi Arabia driver's license, John Talagnani's driver's license, and flight attendant C.C. Lyle's personal effects, including her driver's license and Marriott hotel card. Although a 757 managed to obliterate itself upon impact, fragile material known as paper and fabric managed to survive nearly without a scratch. The FBI also releases pictures of an engine and 2 pieces of fuselage. It is unspecified where those were found. What really happened near Shanksville, Pennsylvania on 9/11 remains a mystery. But one thing seems clear. A 757 did not crash intact into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Pretty clear at one point, and then this whole bunch of smoke and glass, and I think we're just about the last ones in this building right now. I think you should leave. Everybody else is gone. Okay. I'll just make sure that there's nobody else coming downstairs. I hear the top of the building fell down.
In 1984, construction began on World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story office building 300 feet away from the North Tower. It opened to the public in 1987 and housed offices for Department of Defense, Internal Revenue Service, and was also the Secret Service's largest field office. Building 7 was considered the Central Intelligence Agency's largest station outside of Washington, D.C. The details of the office's functions remain classified. The Securities and Exchange Commission was also using the building to store 3,000 to 4,000 files related to their investigations. And of course, they have no record of what those files were. On June 8, 1999, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management Command Center on the 23rd floor is opened.
The new facility is located in downtown Manhattan, across the street from the World Trade Center's Twin Towers.
The system was unexpectedly placed on test status at 6:47 a.m. for a scheduled period of 8 hours. This normally occurs during maintenance, and any fire alarms from the building were to be disregarded. After the second plane strikes the South Tower, Building 7's power was deliberately shut off and its tenants evacuated. Following the collapse of the North Tower, almost all of the surrounding World Trade Center buildings were completely destroyed, but collapse. Building 5, a 9-story building east of the North Tower, suffered from severe fires and structural damage. Building 6, an 8-story building between the North Tower and Building 7, suffered a giant gouge in its roof and severe fires. Neither Building 5 or 6 suffered a collapse. Neither did the Deutsche Bank building, which stands to this day and is currently being demolished beam by beam. Neither did the Millennium Hotel across the street. Building 7, a 47-story office building hundreds of feet away, burns controllably over a few floors and suffers structural damage to its south face before collapsing completely to the ground at near free fall speed. The collapse of Building 7 was rarely reported on the day of and after 9/11.
Yeah, it's very strange that was not even hit by a jet, and yet it falls very rapidly and essentially straight down into its footprint.
Although the collapse of Building 7 was clearly a phenomenon and further investigation was needed, the building's steel was removed from the site and destroyed. No pieces were recovered from the debris for analysis. However, FEMA's volunteer investigators revealed after their limited studies that some pieces of steel from the rubble of Building 7 experienced something never before seen in an office fire. Some pieces of steel had large holes burned through them, evidence that a high-temperature corrosive material had formed and burned through the beams, suggesting temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Celsius were present.
But what the Worcester Polytechnic Institute scientists reported was that steel, as they looked at it, using similar methods to what we've used on the red-gray chips. These are electron microscope methods and X-ray EDS methods. They found high temperature, indication of very high temperatures, oxidation, and sulfur contribute to the initiation of the collapse. That's what NIST says, and I agree with that.
When questioned at a public comment session after the draft's release, NIST was forced to acknowledge that the collapse of WTC-7 experienced a period of freefall for 105 feet.
That is acceleration at 32.2 feet per second squared, which is just dropping a ball in a vacuum, and that's how fast it accelerates. Finally, in their final report, they have this agreement, having been with Chandler and with my comment also, that there was indeed acceleration, not just constant speed, and acceleration at the acceleration due to gravity. In other words, free fall. And they even mentioned free fall for about 105 feet. That's about 8 stories. Now that means, according to what they had previously said in August, which is correct, earlier, August 26th, nothing is in the way of the roof. Nothing. Now you can see in the videos there's a lot of floor is still intact as the roof is moving as a block. So somewhere down below, there's about 8 floors that have been obliterated. I mean, you can't just have the floors sitting there stationary, because that would be mass in the way, and that would slow this acceleration down. Nothing's in the way. The only way I can see how to do that is with controlled demolition, with explosives, to remove that. That's what you do in controlled demolition. You get all this material out of the way, then the upper block travels at close to free fall. In this case, at free fall. It's really amazing.
It's funny Stephen would mention explosives and material being removed. 2 eyewitnesses independently claimed to news channels on 9/11 that they experienced an explosion inside the lower levels of Building 7. The first one is Michael Hess, who went on to UPN 9 News around 11:59 a.m.
Oil refineries in Louisiana.
When we have Frank Uciardo back on the phone with us, Brenda, with some New York City officials. Frank, go ahead.
That's right. I'm standing here right now just off Broadway by City Hall with Michael Hess, who is the city's corporation counsel. Mr. Hess, you were trapped in, I believe, 7 World Trade Center. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was. I was up in the emergency management center on the 23rd floor, and when all the power went out in the building, another gentleman and I walked down to the 8th floor where there was an explosion, and we've been trapped on the 8th floor with smoke, thick smoke all around us for about an hour and a half. But the New York Fire Department, as terrific as they are, just came and got us out.
And the second is Barry Jennings, who went on to ABC 7 shortly after noon.
We're going to bring more of those to you now. Barry Jennings, you were on the 8th floor. You work for the City Housing Department. Explain to me the moment of impact.
Well, me and Mr. Hess, the corporation counsel, were on the 23rd floor. I told him we got to get out of here. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hess. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here. I took a fire extinguisher and I bust the window out. That's when this gentleman here heard my cries for help.
We tracked Barry down in June 2007 to interview him and hopefully elaborate on his experience.
Hi, my name is Barry Jennings. I'm 52 years old. I've worked for 33 years at one location. Basically, I said I'm married, father of 4. It was very, only me, Mr. Hess was up there. After I called several individuals, one individual told me that to leave and leave right away. Mr. Hess came running back in. He said, we're the only ones up here, we got to get out of here. He found the stairwell. When we reached the 6th floor, the landing that we were standing on gave way. There was an explosion, and the landing gave way. And I was left there hanging. I had to climb back up, and now I had to walk back up to the 8th floor. After getting to the 8th floor, everything was dark. It was dark, and it was very, very hot. Very hot. I asked Mr. Hess to test the phones as I took a fire extinguisher and broke out the windows. Once I broke out the windows, I could see outside below me. I saw police cars on fire, buses on fire. I looked, total rooms. Now keep in mind, when I came in there, the lobby had nice escalators. It was a huge lobby. And for me to see what I saw, it was unbelievable. And the firefighter that took us down kept saying, do not look down. And I kept saying why. He said, do not look down. And we were stepping over people. And you know you can feel when you're stepping over people. They took us out through a hole that I don't know who made this hole in this wall. That's how they got us out. They took us out through a hole, through the wall, to safety. As they were taking me out, one firefighter had fallen. I believe he was having a heart attack. But before that, this big giant police officer came to me. And he says, you have to run. I said, I can't run, my knees are swollen. He said, you're gonna have to get on your knees and crawl in. He said, because we have reports of more explosions. And that's when I started crawling. And I saw this guy fall behind me. And his comrades came to his aid. They dragged him to safety. I was looking for an ambulance for my knees, and at that time they told me we got to walk 20 blocks to refuge. Before I got there, Eyewitness News grabbed me and started interviewing me. And that's basically it.
This is where the story takes a turn for the worst. In late August 2008, comments began appearing on YouTube videos of Barry's testimony, claiming he had passed away on August 19, 2008. 2 days before NIST releases its draft report on WTC-7, which directly contradicts Barry's testimony and claims that no explosions occurred inside the building. They explicitly claim there were no witness reports of such a loud noise. To date, the only publicly available information is that Barry was in perfect health before suddenly being admitted to the hospital and subsequently passing away on August 19, 2008. A private investigator, when hired to investigate the disappearance of Barry Jennings, replied, "Due to some of the information I have uncovered, I have determined that this is a job for the police. I have refunded your credit card. Please do not contact me again concerning this individual." In conclusion, 2 men inside World Trade Center Building 7, a skyscraper that housed numerous government agencies whose duties are unknown to the public, are almost killed by an explosion before either of the Twin Towers fell. Although it is damaged far less than any other surrounding World Trade Center buildings, at 5:20 p.m., it collapses into its own footprint, experiencing 105 feet of freefall and barely damaging surrounding structures. And the official government report, which takes almost 7 years to write, says it was all due to fire.
My mind is still there. That day I'll never forget. And the explanations that were given to me is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable.
To scream for answers. September 11th was not just a terrible tragedy that took the lives of thousands of innocent people. It was an American coup, a violent and aggressive seizure of power and a transformation of both foreign and domestic policy. The slaughter of civilians in broad daylight as a means of promoting an agenda. This is not a new concept. Meet Smedley Butler. His father was both a lawyer and a politician. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 1897. He joined the Army at the age of 16, and at the age of 48, he became the Army's youngest Major General. He was twice decorated with the Congressional Medal of Honor. In July 1934, Butler was approached by 2 men who offered him $30 million and the support of 500,000 troops and the mainstream media to lead a coup against President Roosevelt and remove him from office. Butler pretended to go along with it, eventually meeting with the main conspirators behind the plot. The DuPont family and leaders of U.S. Steel, Heinz, Standard Oil, General Motors, Chase National Bank, Goodyear Tires, and last but certainly not least, Prescott Bush himself, President George W. Bush's grandfather. The intention was simple. The media turned on Butler, calling his allegations a hoax, perfect moonshine, as one put it. President Roosevelt eventually cut a deal with the plotters, and nothing more came of it. America was hijacked on September 11, 2001. Not by Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network with box cutters directed from a cave in Afghanistan, but by a group of tyrants, ready and willing to do whatever is necessary to keep their stranglehold on the United States of America. A group beyond any one man or any one administration. Until there is a new investigation into the events, we will not go away. We will not be silent. Ask questions. Demand answers.
We show the towers for the ashes like they were laced with bombs. And ever since we've been at war like Genghis, calm and fiendish for a fascist world state. An Orwellian nightmare with righteous strip bare. Get prepared for the future of wiretaps. Cameras on every corner. Black water sharpshooters with scopes locked on ya. The Patriot Act has us watching our backs. They front like they're here to save us while they're on the attack. And we act like we didn't see it coming from a nation built by theft and genocide. Gunning down opposition, listen, worldwide is well known that America will eat its own. So long to what you thought was democratic. These times are catastrophic, cause war is a means to profit. Control and manipulate the masses, it's classic evil. wasted. They lie, they scam, they cheat and steal. They plot, they fund, they act, it's real. They watch, they hunt, they punish and kill. Welcome to the aftermath. They lie, they scam, they cheat and steal. They plot, they fund, they act, it's real. They watch, they hunt, they punish and kill. Welcome to the aftermath. Ground zero, the launch pad for endless killing. The Bush desperately needed to fool the millions and supporting an agenda to conquer the planet. I wonder how the children felt when the first bomb landed in Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom was the first act of treason. Must I tell you the reason? Start reading and stop believing network news. They're concerned with making money, not telling the truth. Deep in the night, I'm turning and tossing. Knowing cities are burning, lost in the silence of the empire's coffin. Over 1 million Iraqis murdered. Human beings never to be seen again or heard of. Now who's next in the name of America, famous for heinous war acts? Vain, insane leaders feed us lies and ignore facts. But for change, we gotta advance, take a stance and be heard. Silence is the enemy. Words have power, but actions speak louder. Pretend to be free till you die a slave, a soldier in the desert searching for a ghost in the cave. For the corporation, I run out of patience. Sick of seeing troops sent to die for your lives. Spending dollars in debt, we holler in protest till we have your arrest. We will not rest, and we know what you did that day. Killed your own citizens to advance your ways. All my real patriots stand up and say 9/11 was an inside job. They lie, they scam, they cheat and steal. They plot, they fund, they act, it's real. They watch, they hunt, they punish and kill. Welcome to the aftermath. They lie, they scam, they cheat and steal. They plot, they fund, they act, it's real. They watch, they hunt, they punish and kill. Welcome to the aftermath.